Good day to everybody. Finally, we are ready to start our very interesting public hearing about the role of independent public service media for democracy in Europe. Dear Commissioner, dear speakers, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm indeed very privileged and happy to see all of you here today in our discussion under the title Role of Independent Public Service Media for Democracy in Europe. This event is co-organized with my dear colleagues. I'm very happy indeed once we started the preparations and we had excellent, very effective cooperation with Tanja Fajon, Eugen Front, Cecilia Wikström and Tadeusz Zwiefka. I also would like to extend our greetings to those who are watching the event online, as the event is web streamed. So keep smiling in order to appear in good order. Also, I have to inform you that we have the translations to French. It's channel 2, if I'm correct. French is 3, English is 2, and Polish is 18. I'm glad that today we will have such diverse panels with different stakeholders from various EU member states to discuss the present challenges and solutions to preserve public service media independence. The independence of public service media in Europe is directly linked to the strength and health of democracy in Europe, for its role to facilitate inclusive, democratic and multipolar debate. I'm sure we all believe in this. Therefore, certain worrying trends linked to the weakening of this democratic institution in our fellow member states can't be ignored. Institutional and editorial independence is crucial for the public service media to have full support of the citizens to fulfill its role of a so-called fourth estate. Having said this, without further delay, I will give the floor to Mr. Jean-Paul Philippot, the President of the European Broadcasting Union, to make the introductory remarks. As he served the President of the European Broadcasting Union since 2009, with a good knowledge on this business, and began his 5th term in this position in January 2017. He's also the President of the Régie Media Belge, and floor is yours, Jean-Paul.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Commissaire. Messieurs, Mesdames les membres du Parlement, chers collègues,
this, of course, is a very important moment for the EBU, and it's important for me, as person in charge of a public institution, that we should be having this debate on the role of independent public service media for democracy in Europe at the European Parliament. It is particularly important today, just a few months away from some major elections, important for democracy, important for Europe, just a few months away from elections which will be covered in a pluralistic and independent manner by all journalists in the European public service media. To begin with, I would like to share with you a couple of thoughts. Early March, the Swiss rejected the Nobilag populist initiative, which aimed simply at doing away with public service funding in Switzerland. That was a strong signal from Swiss citizens in favor of their public service. But despite that, in the follow-up to that, 100 million Swiss francs savings in a year. 6 months later, another public service media bore the brunt of populistic pressure. Indeed, our colleagues in Denmark now are being restricted in their mission They are seeing the principles of neutrality and editorial independence endangered. They are being forced to cut their budgets by 20% over the next 5 years. This reminds us of things which happened just a few years ago, which we seem to have all forgotten about. In Greece, just a few years ago, the public service was actually closed down. And this week, in Greece, the main commercial channel, Sky, with a view to illustrating an awful event, a young gay man beaten to death in a shop, launched a census on their channel, asking people in Greece, whom do you not wish to have as a neighbor? Everywhere in Europe, democratically elected parliaments embrace populistic themes and are attacking public service media. They consider that democratic legitimacy given to them by elections mean they do not need to have independent public service media, as if that is enough, as if communication and informing were just exactly the same thing. In Europe, people are talking about saving costs for the state, for the citizen. But after all, the cost of public service in Europe is 3.08 euros a month, much less than a subscription to Netflix. We can demonstrate that a strong public service media actually contributes to democratic health. More participation in elections, more elections, less extreme right parties. Attacking public service media is attacking one of the pillars of democracy. Unfortunately, public service media are increasingly alone in undertaking certain missions which are indispensable for any democratic society. These media speak to everyone in their singularity, but speak to all and strengthens the feeling of belonging to a community, close to local realities. They also help people face large societal challenges. They enhance proximity, try and understand the call for the feeling of malaise. They contribute to strengthening identities and the recognition of local heritage. They strengthen the knowledge of our past, which is important for our collective future. They offer a balanced range of programs, information, culture, leisure, sport, etc. Innovation is very much at the heart of their approach, and they condition the conditions of an original offer which resists any single way of thinking. Public services in Europe will be investing more than 18 billion in terms of original content, 2.5 more than the combined investment of Netflix and Amazon worldwide. At the heart of a system of creative and innovating players, they have a positive impact on the local economy. Looking into the contribution in Belgium of a public service such as RTBF in the local well-being shows that for €1 invested by the RTBF, 2.7 euros are invested in the Belgian economy. And this is so important nowadays, with all this information provided by digitalization. Public services provide some clear indicators. The Rota Institute this spring conducted a study throughout Europe, and more than 1 person out of 2 no longer trusts the information media. But the public service media in most European countries are considered the most believable. And finally, unlike the net giants, the public service medias execute a contract which has been agreed with the representatives of those to whom their services are meant. They are submitted to independent checks and balances. Their journalists are independent, professional. They have to respect clear codes of conduct. As we begin today's event, let us not forget that in our European legislation, there are no references to the need for a state to have a public service media, to guarantee its funding and its independence. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Philippot.
Thank you, Mr. Philippot.
I turn to our key speaker, my former colleague, our former colleague, rightly to pronounce it, Maria Gabriel, who is the European Commissioner for the Digital Economy and Society. Maria, we are attentively listening to your message.
Merci beaucoup, Petras, Mesdames et Messieurs les députés, chers collègues. Tout d'abord, je voudrais vous remercier d'avoir organisé cette conférence, mais aussi de vous féliciter.
And I would like to congratulate you too, because thanks to this conference, we are actually bringing to the fore one of the challenges to our fundamental values, which is the independence of the press and the plurality of the press. And it's always a pleasure to come to the Parliament. It's a pleasure to see three groups, SED, EPP and ALDE, all speak with one voice about independent media, which enshrine these fundamental principles and values. I'd like to start by recalling what President Juncker said when he gave his State of the Union address. Europe must imperatively cherish freedom of the press because, and I quote him, there is no democracy without a free press. The defense of the freedom of the press and the plurality of the media is a fight which must be undertaken at all times. It is not a given, and this conference goes to show this. And as we all know, public service media have an extremely important role to play, partly to guarantee the very existence of real pluralism in each of our member states, but also to ensure that each citizen can gain access to free and independent information, to quality programs, and therefore openness on the world. Indeed, the content produced and broadcast by public service broadcasters are accessible to one and all, everywhere, and free of charge. They propose information programs, education, advice, and also entertainment, with one main requirement, which is quality. And like all media, the broadcasters in the public service aim to reach the largest audience possible, but it is by turning to different groups of ages and specific groups that they actually reach the largest audience possible. And I would like to pay tribute to the role played by the public service media you represent here in sometimes fragmented national contexts, where the resources which you invest into covering local realities play a key role and create a link between all our citizens who can fully become aware of our diversity. And all this contributes to promoting pluralism throughout the media landscape in Europe. As we know, it is first and foremost up to member states to guarantee the freedom and pluralism of public service media on their territory. Nevertheless, any event unfolding in one member state has an impact on all the other member states. And therefore, we must seize all opportunities which are there to defend our shared values. Real European citizenship can only evolve if citizens are free and able to make up their own mind, partly through independent and free public service media. This is particularly important in the run-up to elections, as will be the case soon. Nevertheless, and comments made repeatedly show that this is the case, Europe is not entirely protected from attacks on the media, on pressure, and sometimes violent attacks and even the assassination of journalists. And this is why I would like to emphasize the importance of the Media Pluralism Monitor. This is an independent tool which will measure the risks run by public service media through a number of indicators, and which prove that not one single member state of the Union is immune to this type of risk, be it an economic risk, a legal risk, or a political risk. The independence of public service media in terms of financing and governance is one of the 20 indicators in this monitor. And the results of this monitoring show that, unfortunately, quite a few member states now are at serious risk. And we cannot neglect that risk. This need for independence has been fully taken into account by the three institutions as part of the revision of the directive on audiovisual public service media. And I would like to pay tribute to the efforts and the made by the Parliament throughout the negotiation. I was part of those negotiations in my capacity as Commissioner. And for us, what is important is to see how we can strengthen those measures which will support the independence of the media, while expressly stating that member states must ensure the full independence of regulators. That is what we did as part of our revision of the SMA directive, and the members of the European Parliament here and on many occasions have shown how important these principles of freedom of the press and pluralism of media are to them. And I see here in the room certain colleagues who are not here just for this conference. This conference is proof of their long-standing interest in this subject. And the fact that this debate is happening here today is another proof of the fact. And I must say I'm most grateful to the Austrian presidency of the Council for preparing a conference and conclusions on matters relating to the media. But let us come back to my own portfolio, my own remit. We can see that nowadays the media are facing three challenges: the multiplication of platforms, the drop in advertising revenue, and the difficulty to sell the content on the internet. And the position of public service media is quite particular in this particular context, but rather difficult nevertheless, although in certain countries funding is being challenged and license fees are being questioned, as indeed the very necessity of such a service. Mr. Philippot himself referred to this. But this brings us to another question. Are things as bad as they seem? Are those who bode messages of ill will those who are right? I refuse to believe that. I believe that there are considerable differences. The media are going through fundamental changes, and it is thanks to this intellectual and technological change that new media offers could be supplied, and new champions of freedom of expression. Decisions pertaining to funding raises the question of whether how the digital and traditional media can live together. I believe this is an opportunity to be seized for broadcasters in the public sector. Innovating technologies bring with them the promise of access to a pan-European, even a worldwide audience. Viewers can now enjoy a tremendous variety of programs while sitting at home, as they will on their different screens, where and when they wish. This has not only an economic dimension, because of course we must realize digitalization increases the ability of public broadcasters to pursue their mission. Of course, these transformations go together with very difficult, lively debates, partly in terms of how to fund these services. This sometimes unleashes very difficult debate, but which we can win. The European Union recognizes the importance of public service media, which are directly linked to the needs for democracy and culture and society of all our societies. Protocol 29 on the public broadcasting system in the member states, which has been annexed to the TFEU, expressly recognizes the competence of member states regarding the funding of public broadcasters. Oh, the EPP's just taken a bit of a fall.
Standing coalition.
Thank you. Pardon pour cette interruption.
Sorry for that bit of an interruption. But as I was saying, the form, the modalities, the conditions of this funding, as we know, is the purview of member states. And for us, this is an essential point. But if I've mentioned it is not by chance, because the whole issue of funding brings us to the very difficult issue of the trust which is put in our media in a world where information circulates increasingly rapidly and where it is sometimes extremely difficult to make a distinction between what is true and what is fake, to avoid information overdose. The public service media must act as a reference point for those who wish to obtain verified and qualified information. The results of recent census undertaken by Eurobarometer shows that people consider that the traditional public service media are their most trustworthy source of information. Despite this, we must realize that these public service media can be affected by the issue of online disinformation, because citizens seem to be less trusting than they were before in all forms of media. As you know, I am very attached to this subject. It lies close to my heart, but I really believe that disinformation is bad for our democracies because it means that citizens cannot take enlightened decisions based on pluralist and quality information. As journalists say, you may hold your own opinions, but the facts are something else. And if we do not abide by that certainty, disinformation actually jeopardizes their trust in our media, in our institutions. And in order to fight against this trend, the Commission back in April adopted a recommendation on a European approach to fight against online disinformation. And it contains our response, the Commission's response to this challenge. And it attempts to propose actions we can take together to re-establish, to restore the trust of our citizens in our public service media. As many of you know, and I will just take 1 minute to mention this, in this communication we said that in the short term we were going to organize a multi-party forum on disinformation with a view to preparing for the very first time in the world a code of best practice. During the summer, the main stakeholders, platformers, advertisers worked together on this code of good conduct. Emphasis was laid on improving transparency regarding sponsored content and in particular political advertising, and on the improvement of the surveillance of advertising to reduce the impact of the providers of disinformation. And thanks to this code of conduct, platforms and the advertising industry undertake to commit themselves to 5 areas of action. 1, to reduce advertising income from certain accounts and websites that propagate disinformation. 2, to improve the transparency of political advertising and partisan advertising. 3, to keep a watch on false accounts and robots. 5, the way to pinpoint disinformation and find their sources. And 5, to give the scientific community the means whereby they can follow and analyze online disinformation. And as usual, the Parliament is one of the pioneers in this field. In fact, tomorrow there will be a conference here on trusted whistleblowers to make some headway in this. So this code of conduct has just been published, just as I speak. In fact, I received a copy of it just before I came here. I'm hoping that platforms and advertisers will make a commitment immediately. And other players, those who were part of the board, journalists, civil society, researchers, scientists, with trusted whistleblowers, we are hoping they will show a sense of proportion and judge the code of conduct as it should be. Of course, the Commission will take its time to evaluate its effects and will present, if necessary, some further action in this field. The timing was very clear. We wanted to have the code by September. We wanted to give them the possibility of showing us that thanks to voluntary measures, we could get results by October, and then by the end of December, we would take a look at the situation and see if things are satisfactory or not, and see what measures might need to be taken. So in this effort to fight against disinformation, the Commission also has supported a number of operational projects, amongst which an independent European network of fact-checkers. And I'm delighted that a large number of these fact-checkers will be meeting here tomorrow at the European Parliament and take part in a two-day conference aimed at strengthening their role in the run-up to the European elections in 2019. So all this energy to fight against disinformation is being deployed, but part of the resources of the Commission is being devoted to giving European citizens new technological tools, helping them to detect and signal disinformation projects. In Horizon 2020, we have measures facilitating commercialization on the basis of blockchain and artificial intelligence. Thank you again to the Parliament for the pilot project, which has enabled us to speed up the pace and to show that if we work together as a community, we can seize the opportunities offered by new technologies to deal with traditional but terribly important topics and issues. And finally, regarding education to the media education, which is another subject which lies close to my heart, could I say that I count on you, on your active participation, so that for the first time the European Week on Media Education, which will be taking place in 2019, will deal with very practical issues. My intention is not for the Commission to say what one should promote, what one should give greater visibility to. I'm hoping that the Parliament, journalists, the media will give us practical examples so that we can put them to the fore, so that we can show these examples to society at large and show how important this is. This also, and this is the case of these pilot projects and preparatory actions launched by the Parliament. And here I would like to give one example, and that is the European Centre for the Freedom of the Press and Media, based in Leipzig in Germany. At the initiative of the European Parliament, new projects will be launched very soon, and there will soon be a call for tenders published on the Commission's website. I need to emphasize this because as part of our communication on the fight against disinformation, between now and the end of the year, we'll be launching a number of projects with a view to supporting quality journalism, the independence of journalists and investigative journalism. And I'm delighted that we have managed to include in the programme Creative Europe an amount earmarked for these specific initiatives. So for 2021 to 2027, Creative Europe will have an additional budget line to finance a pluralist and diversified media environment. Of course, the next months will be essential, and we hope we will get the support from the MFF through the Parliament and the Member States. So, ladies and gentlemen, the public service media mission pursued by the organizations you represent enshrines our shared European values of freedom of expression and independence of the media. And in the present context, in a world which is crisscrossed by ever faster change, public service media are constantly challenged, both from a technological point of view as from a financial point of view. The European institutions are determined to accompany the public service media on this road, this balance between resilience and evolution, while respecting the competencies of the member states and of the media themselves. And it is through our fight against disinformation and by supporting operational programs and plans on the ground that our European institutions have the power to make a difference. In closing, I would like to come back to what I said at the beginning of my presentation. You will remember I referred to what President Juncker said, according to whom there is no democracy without a free press. So to conclude, I'd like to take this even further and quote Thomas Jefferson, whom 2 centuries ago already emphasized that beyond our institutions, it is our freedom as a whole which depends on the freedom of the media. As he said, and I quote, "Our freedom depends on the freedom of the press and cannot be restricted without being totally lost." So the time has come for me to thank you for your attention, but above all to thank you for the work you are doing in the defense of our modern democracies. And of course, I would like to appeal to you all and make sure you continue this work apace, because as the Canard Enchaîné says, which is a French satirical press, the freedom of the press only wears down when you do not use it. And I hope you have an excellent debate this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for coming, joining us, and addressing this issue in a very comprehensive way. I mean, pointing out many aspects and actions which are and will be taken by the Commission in order to follow up and ensure the freedom of broadcasting and quality of broadcasting what comes to public service media. Although we are slightly behind our schedule, ladies and gentlemen, but I have a good piece of information to you, since coffee and tea have arrived and are served just behind you. Please help yourself, do it individually, and we immediately jump on session 1, and I ask Tania Fayon to take over the chairmanship and go forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and my warm welcome to everyone. I'm extremely glad that we managed to organize this conference that is very important in time. Thank you for all opening remarks, and especially for very strong and determined engagement of our commissioner. And we heard a lot what the Commission is planning to do. This session will focus, as we are running a little bit behind the time, especially on how we as legislator and the role of parliaments can influence to ensure freedom of the expression and media pluralism. We know that today the rise of attacks against the freedom of press is in Europe extremely alarming. From Hungary, Slovakia, Malta, Greece, recently Austria, different cases where we see that our democracies, the rule of law, and especially also the role of media, including the public services, are undermined. And we have to fight against that. So I'm happy to have two very distinguished guests in this panel that will a bit enlighten the situation of the media press and freedom of expression in 2 countries, but also public services, and also discuss with us a very important question, because there are different views on as to what role Parliament should play in ensuring media pluralism and freedom of expression. So I would like to welcome on my left Ms. Sandra Basic-Hrvatin, Professor of Communology at the University of Primorska, who also works as independent expert for the Council of Europe and OSCE and the European Commission in the field of media regulation, and Mr. Milan Friedrich, Director of Program, Czech Television and Vice Chairman, TV Committee of European Broadcasting Union. I know that the Commissioner will leave us at some point, but I would directly start with Ms. Basic-Hrvatin with a question. First of all, maybe you can reflect already on what has been said, and how do you see today, on one hand, the role of media freedom and pluralism of media in Slovenia, public services? I know it's a very broad question, but how can we as parliaments, where are these lines where we can regulate or not? Thank you.
Could you stay just for a minute? I'm sorry, could you stay just for a minute? I have a few remarks on your, it's excellent speech. I'm not politician. So I have two remarks. First, you quoted Thomas Jefferson, which is a very nice quote, but you have also for the same person quote 15 years later when Thomas Jefferson said that the only worth thing he can find in newspaper is advertising. The only difference between Thomas Jefferson saying the first quote and Thomas Jefferson saying the second quote is that at the time when he was saying this, he was a president. So politicians, when they are in the function, when they are working as a politician, see media as in a very different way. And the second thing is, unfortunately, I think that I'm coming from the universal, parallel universum, like two blind people who saw the big animal and they are touching by the tail. I can see elephant and you or the Commission can see broom. So I don't think that Europe has any media policy, not to say any successful media policy which protects rights of the citizens. And unfortunately, in 8 months, you will see the results, concrete results. So if it's I'm sorry. And I can say also about Slovenia, it's fine to talk generally about freedom of expression, freedom of media. You know, it doesn't hurt. I mean, you can say whatever you want. But when you work in the field, when you work with the journalists, when you are teaching journalists for 20 years and all your former students are not working anymore in journalism because it's so hard, it's so stressful, it's under such pressure, then you see that we are dealing with a serious problem. In future time, we don't have journalists, we will have PR people, we will have advertisers, we will have algorithms, but we will not have people who will trust, who will provide us with information. So in case of Slovenia, I think it's like a minefield. I mean, personally, I am in let's say, in communication exile. I don't read any newspaper because you know that feeling when you are reading something and you are so angry that you cannot believe that somebody can produce such type of writing, because it's not journalism for me. When you have a public service broadcaster who is constantly under attack, and after 10 years, not left, not right government can change the law because everyone likes politicians from left and right to have public service under control. And of course, you have journalists who are massively leaving the profession, massively, who are, especially women in journalism, and I think European Parliament should also question the role of women in journalism, because women in journalism are under not just political threats, but also sexist, misogynist pressures which can influence their work. So my basic, if I can just read it, my basic argument is that the European Union does not have a media policy, that Europe as a whole does not have a media policy. Rather, it has produced a series of legal documents whose loose definitions seek primarily to protect the economic interests of media companies and to ensure the freedom of expression as a basic human right, but without outlining any clear demands protecting the right of people. You know what are the basic European documents. You know for the Charter of Fundamental Rights of European Union, you know the Amsterdam Protocol, which protects also financing of the public service organization. But what to do in the situation, in the cases when the media is subject to the government pressure that enables them to function in the public interest? What mechanism have European politics for effective protection of media independence? If the media should lose financing coming from public sources overnight due to populism and unfounded reason, what can the European Parliament do? That's the basic question. On the other side, the Commission, and I'm sorry that the Commissioner left because I don't agree in most of her presentation. The Commission is much more precise when it comes to the respect of competition in cases of public media functioning. The contribution paid by European citizens for the functioning of public media is understood by the Commission as state support that could potentially limit the competition on the media market, which is why it should be strictly overseen by the competition authorities. Communique adopted for the reason by the Commission, in contrast with the Amsterdam Protocol, states very clearly the mechanism for sanctioning those who break the rules of the market. In short, the crucial documents of European media politics should be found elsewhere, in the field of protection of competition. Even on structural, on symbolic level, there is no media policy. Commission abolished the Directorate for the Media. There was no longer a need for it. We don't have media, we have media services. The field of media has transferred to directorates for the competition, infrastructure, digital economy and society, digital market and so on. Europe has no protective measure that could stifle the power of global actors that are performing the role of media, digital platforms, but are not considered as media in the current legislation. Europe has no mechanism that could stifle the demise of the media sector. It has no mechanism for preventing the growth of hate speech and curb the lies that are presented and sold as news. Europe has left its citizens to a regulation based on the goodwill of telecommunication giants that determine much more over that we can get from the platforms. Do you really think that Facebook and Google care about communication rights of people, or do you really think that they care about our privacy and anything else? European Union is approaching many questions relating to the management of media, key political questions in our view, with no clearly defined political commitment. Instead, it employs the soft law approach in relation to media pluralism, promotes best practices with regard to transparency, resorts the effective measurement of media freedom, taking the risk, no risk approach, talks of commitments, positive outcomes, self-regulation, professional standards, calls for codes of conduct, but this is not a politics. This is not at all a politics in the public interest. European media politics should be answering two main questions: how to take care of the existence of public interest in media field in 21st century, and what kind of regulatory mechanism could prevent the abuse of media power in a situation where we cannot even agree on the answer to the question, what does the media even mean today? The idea of public media is almost a century old, and it represents one of the most innovative and democratic ways of financing public interest in the field of media. What is a novelty today in this context is the lack of political will to base the entirety of the media system on different foundations. This means transferring the regulation of the media from the field of competition back to the domain of human rights, and that is the role of the European Parliament. Journalism in public interest is a crucial communicational public good that we still have, but there is no guarantee that we will have in the future. We need public media now more than ever to provide the public with credible information about all events, to give voices to those that are systematically excluded from the public debate, to give the voices to which are excluded from the commercial media because they are not good products to sell to advertising, to be protector of fundamental human rights and values in all public discussion, protecting public media and ensuring them the ability to carry on with their mission is one of the key roles of the European Parliament in the next mandate. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. I carefully tried to note down all the messages and criticism you were saying and giving us some idea where we stand today in legislating or not. And I perfectly agree that we need public media today more than ever, and that we have to move back to the domain of human rights, as you said. You emphasized many difficult moments we have, not only in Slovenia, I imagine also in Czech and in many other countries, that no matter which political authority is there, be it left, be it right, they always try to control public media. And how to move away from that, how to release the pressure on the journalism and to ensure freedom of the press in such situation. And I understood also the threat, what we can expect in 8 months from now, following the trends in Europe. I would now turn to you and to the situation in Czech and in your public service. I imagine you will be pretty much vocal, the same as Ms. Basic-Horvatin, please. And then, colleagues, if you have questions or comments, we will have also the opportunity, please raise your hand, because it's much easier to have a bit widely debate, that you also address what would you like to ask the questions to our guests.
Thank you very much for possibility to be here, especially for me, because I am now representative of Czech Television here, but a couple of years ago I was 8 years correspondent, and many times I was in European Parliament like a journalist, and I am for the first time here like a guest. That's really personal and in my heart. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation of public service media all across Europe is not simple. In Denmark, for example, the public service broadcaster is planning to cancel about 400 positions and close down the operation of 3 television and radio stations. These steps are to be taken on the basis of the media reforms proposed by the country's government. As a result, the public service broadcaster is going to lose 20% of its funding in the course of the next 5 years. The pressure on the reduction of costs of public service media can also be seen in France. Based on a government declaration, France Television, Radio France, Arte, and others will have to save 190 million euro by 2022. All of us still remember the public debate about the new BBC charter in Britain. Media are forced to adapt themselves to technological developments, viewing trends, and last but not least, to economic pressure. As shown by the example of Switzerland, however, the situation is not as catastrophic. For many, it was like a bolt from the blue to learn that in a referendum, the Swiss voted down the cancellation of the license fees by a vast majority. In fact, 71.6% of the eligible voters voted against the cancellation. It was good news about the quality of public service media and about the sense of responsibility of the Swiss public. And certainly it was good news for all public service media, including Czech Television in Europe. Until August 31st, 2013, Czech Television had broadcast programs on 4 different channels. The general channels CT1 and CT2, and the thematic channels CT Sport and CT24, which is a news channel. On August 31st, 2013, Czech TV launched 2 more thematic channels, CTD, a channel dedicated to children's programming, which broadcasts daily between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m., and CT Art, a channel dedicated to culture, which broadcasts daily from 8 p.m. This year, at the end of the summer, we celebrated their 5th anniversary. I am proud to say in this context that more than a half of the adult population considers one of the Czech television channels their main channel. Over 71% of the viewers also regard Czech television as credible. This percentage is higher than the rates achieved by our models, such as the German ARD or the BBC. The high credibility rating concerns, however, not only Czech television as a whole, but also its news programs, which is, in my opinion, particularly significant. According to 2/3 of the viewers in 2017, the Czech television flagship news program Events represented the most credible current affairs program in the country, which had been one of the best results achieved since the launch of the survey in 2013. This rating is more than 3 times higher than the rating achieved by the current affairs programs offered by other televisions. This high credibility rating is confirmed, for example, during various extraordinary events, such as floods or important foreign events. In these contexts, Czech television becomes the viewer's first choice and is widely expected to immediately provide relevant information. Furthermore, it is the network of 12 news reporters abroad that distinguish the public service medium from its rivals. Only Czech radio, which is also a public service medium, has a similar network. The Czech television channels were the strongest television group in the first semester of 2018, reporting a total viewing rate of 30.9% among viewers over 15 years of age. For comparison, the viewing rate of the strongest commercial group for the same period was at level 29.2%. The individual thematic channels are also doing well. CT24, with its day-round broadcasting, is just like CT Sport among the best in Europe when it comes to reach. CTD Kids channel shows one of the best viewing rates among the public service children's program channels in other European countries. You may be asking how difficult it has been to achieve these results and what are the specifics of Czech television. Czech television is regulated by the Czech Television Act and by other regulations. The Council of Czech Television, as its supervisory body, is elected by the Parliament. Its main source of funding consists of license fees, which currently account for over 90% of its income. So much for a brief introduction of the conditions of its work. Czech television's own production is one of the main in Czech Republic. At present, it focuses mainly on big historical dramas as the country celebrates 100 years of the creation of an independent state. Therefore, in these months, we offer our viewers programs and films which also commemorate other historical events, such as the Communist Revolution in 1948 or the invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968. All these thematic programs stir a keen interest on the part of our viewers, and Czech television does not need to fear the competition of the commercial media in this area. Here you fully realize the extent of the public service. Personally, I cannot imagine who would substitute for Czech television in this service. Obviously, as elsewhere in Europe, Czech television too becomes a target of various objections or attacks by politicians and various influential groups. This is often in contrast with the above statistical information about its high credibility rates as persuaded by the public. in situations like that, you can always think about the real objective of similar attacks. Could it be an attempt to weaken its position in the public area? In the Czech Republic, for example, we feel a specific relation of the President of the Republic to the Czech Television. The head of the state has become famous by his criticism of journalists, which has a practical effect on us. The President refuses to appear in any discussion programs organized by Czech Television. Of course, Czech Television does not operate in a vacuum. Its status is anchored in the legislation, which strictly defines its relationship to the Parliament. This means that by approving laws and license fee amounts and by electing the Council of Czech Television, control body, control authority, the Parliament decides about the conditions of its functioning. However, one needs to emphasize that the legislation was created back in 1990s and that this legislation, in many respects, fails to reflect the new viewing and technological trends. At present, for example, we are dealing with the transition to DVB-T2, and it turns out that the legislators could not expect this sort of development more than 20 years ago. All this shows the utmost need to lead a public debate about all subjects relating to public service. The objectiveness of the news coverage, the sports programs that can be viewed by viewers as well as those that do not make it into the programming for economic reasons, digitalization, programs for minority viewers, education. In many areas, we cooperated with Czech radio. Unlike in other countries, Czech radio is not part of the same legal person as Czech television. We can, however, effectively share experience. As stated in the beginning, it is also important to learn from our foreign partners. For this reason, I consider the experience acquired from the EBU highly significant. Just like here in the European Parliament, it is a platform which allows acquiring invaluable information and establishing well-functioning cooperation. Within the EBU, you can find various small groups, such as the V4, Visegrad Group, CEE Group, where we exchange experience as to media in Central and Eastern Europe. We do carefully monitor the development in the surrounding countries. In fact, the Slovak RTVS or the Austrian ORF are among our most common international co-production partners. This is also the main reason why I am here, to share experience in an effort to provide a most effective service to public. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Friedrich. If there are no comments at that point, I would still try to pose another question, maybe slightly different, because you both expressed all the difficulties in the situation in two countries, but broader than that. Now, my question would be maybe to Sandra first, because public service media, we heard situation Denmark, France, Czechia, Slovenia. It is clear in Europe we don't have proper or any mechanisms to effectively safeguard the independence of public media. For the last decade in the European Parliament, we are often dealing with issuing pressure on the governments or ensuring how to make press freedom and media pluralism. But the European Commission, on the other hand, argued that the media were a responsibility of the national states, which you both clearly pose as a problem. But what can we do as a European Parliament if there is, for example, a political willingness to protect public media, But what kind of then state regulation is acceptable in your eyes? Do we need media legislation?
You mean
on the national state, but then on the European, as European Parliament or European legislators, knowing that one institution at least is arguing this is a domain of national states. So is it possible to regulate? And then later I would even go to big platforms such as Facebook, Google, and technological development.
No, I don't think so that that it's a good idea to have a single media regulation. I have a problem because 10 years ago, or even more than 10 years ago, I mean, the Commission actually replaced most of the media with the term services. And it's not just linguistical point. Services, when you have services, you are just dealing with the quality of the service. Media are much more than service. That's my crucial point. And we have a very good working institution like EBU, who is constantly providing national countries with the help to prepare the best national public service regulation as possible. I mean, even in my country, our President of the Republic once said that he would like to have something like BBC. And then I replied to him, and I would love to have a queen in Slovenia. So it's not so easy to do that. You need to take into account national necessities of the people, but with some clear standards. And I think if you are looking that, you already have. I mean, EBU is producing all these documents, and they have to be taken very seriously. More what I need is in the situation. For example, in the case of Slovenia, when we were in a session period, there was so many mechanisms for civil society to fight against media pressure and so on, because European Commission helped. Now, forget it. I mean, you can put the pressure on Serbian government, on Macedonian government, on Montenegrin government, but put the pressure on Slovenian government, there is no way. So my idea is to have a clear mechanism, at least on political level, not in a kind of legislation, but a clear mechanism which will say that there are some values, there are some standards we have to protect for our citizens. That's freedom of expression, that's protection of dignity of human beings, against hate speech, against discrimination, against fake news, and so on. And I more see European Parliament as a kind of guidance for the European Commission. You have to protect, like, let's say, a strategy, a clear strategy. What is the strategic position of the European Parliament regarding media, reforms media issue? And then Commission prepare a document, not vice versa, that Commission prepare a document and then you have to amend it or whatever. So I am absolutely against unified media legislation and for effective mechanism which now lack.
Thank you, Sandra. And as a follow-up to your answer, and I imagine you will also try to reply on that, I would ask you, I would go a step further, clear mechanism on values, but also among the media itself and journalists. You are a former journalist, I was a former journalist. Knowing today journalism to some extent, everyone almost can write with the new challenges or with the new technical platforms, or even in the traditional media, basically everything. Even journalism is losing professionalism to a big extent because of the circumstances they operate. How much the journalism or the media can be self-regulatory as well in this situation? Because I think this is also very crucial, knowing a lot of media that is legitimizing the language that is not any more professional and credible to the term of journalism.
Thank you. I think that you can be self-regulatory if you have tools. I can speak from my own experience from Czech Television. It's 6 years we started evaluate and work with our broadcasting, especially news, that we evaluate value of public service, of what we do for public in our broadcasting. Every year we have a report or review like this, very, very concrete. It's based on the same tool which was established 8-9 years ago in BBC and also in Netherlands. We combined these instruments together to have some feedback, because without feedback you cannot say, okay, public says this one, because politicians sometimes are saying, you are not broadcasting for the public. Many people, I talk to many people, people are saying public service is lying. Public service is only for elite, for people from capital, for some strange people, and normal, ordinary citizens doesn't believe in public service. And for this to be in controversy, to answer on these objections, you need some tools. And one of these tools is our report, what we are doing on this basis. Second was, we, in cooperation with EBU, we had a peer-to-peer review in 2014. We were the first company in EBU in Europe which was under this survey, peer-to-peer. And it was very important because this group of 12 people, high-level people across Europe, just made a screening of Czech television, what we are doing in news, what we are doing in production, which is how works our management on high level, on middle level, on everything. And we do all these reports publicly and we publish it for the public. And also we are trying to put this information to the parliament, to attention, and we think that this is the only way how to be a relevant partner in this and how to show that the work what we are doing is based on relevant information and is based on relevant citizen opinions.
Thank you. They are warning me that we have to slowly wrap up as we are running late, but nevertheless, one short question I have to add. It's something, I mean, I could go on for long, but platforms such as Google and Facebook, and you brought that. I mean, I was recently visiting them, and it is really scary to see how these technological giants or giants are really always 10 steps ahead of us. And I had a frank discussion with them, asking them, is it possible to kind of regulate when it comes to all the services they are offering? And they say, it's impossible. It's always too slow for our development. Now, this is scary to understand. We are just consumers and users at the end of what you said. You don't like the word service. I don't like it either. It's media that we should say. But should we establish mechanisms to control such platforms, even though I already said that I don't see the way how we can do it, but maybe you see better this way, or is it possible to control them? And to what extent?
I mean, for Facebook and Google, it's a perfect situation. They have algorithms. They don't need people. I mean, people are leaking. People are asking for maternity leave. People want raises. Whatever. Algorithm doesn't need anything. I don't think you can regulate, but I think we have to demand from them that they respect some basic rules, at least to reveal how algorithm works. Could you imagine a situation that first in, I don't know, from 18th century when people are fighting for the freedom of express, now we have a situation that the private company is actually regulating and giving us freedom of expression. It never happened before. So it's only up to private company to decide if they are going to allow you to have your posts on Facebook or whatever. And at the end, just ask yourself, what is Facebook? What are they? What are they? I mean, if you, let's say, you know, there's cataclysmic conspiracy theory, you just plug in all the electricity. What are they? They are selling us. We are the product. There is a famous saying, if you are not paying for the media, if you are not paying for the content, and we are used to do that. I mean, nowhere in the world, especially this neoliberal approach, there is no such thing as a free lunch. Only in the media business that people think that they are giving information, that they are receiving information for free. It's also up to us. It's our fault because we didn't fight, we didn't demand for good information and so on. So, I don't know. Maybe for the first step, ask Zuckerberg and Bril and Page and others to come to European Parliament and explain what are they doing with us citizens. I don't know.
Thank you.
I mean, you are the politicians.
Yes, thank you. We had Zuckerberg here. We could discuss how successful. Thank you, Sandra. We had Zuckerberg also here. We can elaborate how successful the meeting was. I don't think it was very successful, or maybe we didn't use the institution to the extent that would be more successful. Would you still wish to reply on that? And then we will wrap up.
I have a mixture of emotions and opinions on this issue, on this question, because it's very complicated and it's not easy. On one hand, I am representative of public service media, which is really, really, really highly regulated. But not only public service media. When you see TV business, TV world, all TVs are highly regulated. If we broadcast live, there is some authority control body which is service for the public, for citizens, and citizens have right for truth. This is basic for legislation which was established for TV broadcasting. And certainly if like man from TV, I would say yes, everything and everybody must be regulated, because
like public service.
why we are and why or all TV, all radio broadcasters, which is reality not from last couple of years, but this is reality of decades from Second World War. But on the other hand, we could see survey in which Facebook or information from internet, they have the lowest ratings of trust of the people. Public service is very trustful, but information from, we have 71%, Facebook 5%. And that means that people are not dumb. People know that, okay, there is some information, but they don't believe in everything what is published in social media networks. And I think that for us, like serious media, especially public service, is a space to persuade people that, okay, you have a really, really free service of news of everything, but if you want to be 100% sure that this is trustful, you can switch on TV or switch on radio or read real press media information which is official, and you can be, it's a reliable source of information. And I think this is a space for us how to survive in the future, to be this pillar for citizens, that we are the pillar of trustful information.
Thank you very much to both of you. I think it was really an interesting opening panel. I would ask my colleague Eugen Freund, also a former journalist, to continue with challenges to the public media and next panelists. Thank you again. A lot to think and even more to do, which I will see how we will tackle in the future.
Good afternoon. I'm Eugen Freund. I'm a member of the European Parliament for the Social Democratic Alliance. I say this to our viewers who watch on live stream and don't know who might not know who is talking to them. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon and to have an expert panel who will be discussing the issue challenges to public service media in Europe. It is not, ladies and gentlemen, without a certain irony that I am sitting here, as I was a member of the public broadcasting service company, ORF, in Austria for almost 40 years, with a few interruptions, starting at 1972 and ending at 2013. I could tell you a lot of things. There is a very popular saying in Austria. It's in German, but I would translate it in English because we don't have a German interpreter here. Ich könnte Ihnen Sachen erzählen, aber ich will Ihnen nicht verderben. I could tell you things, but I don't want to ruin you. I was, as I said, for 40 years with the public broadcaster. So a lot of things had happened then. But before I give you sort of my assessment, a brief assessment, I would like to introduce the panelists here. To my left, yes. To my left is Monika Garbaciałowska-Budriene. I hope the Monika came out fine. I'm not sure about the rest of it. She is Director General for National Radio and Television in Lithuania, and she is certainly the best expert on the task and challenges of a public broadcaster. To the very left is Krzysztof Luft. I hope I got this right, but he made it easy for me with his last name. He has a very illustrious career. Krzysztof started as an actor, appearing in theaters and movies. Later on, he became an anchorman of TVP, the Polish public broadcaster, and I'm sure he will tell us what the difference was between the two jobs. In 1999, he sort of joined politics and became a spokesman for the then Prime Minister Jerzy Buzek, who is now, as you all know, has been in the European Parliament for many, many years. So who would know better about the situation in Poland than Krzysztof? And last but not least, oops, let it go, there is Klaus Unterberger. He's head of the Public Value Department of ORF, my previous employer, the public broadcaster in Austria, focusing on public service, on the public service mission. He publishes a yearly report on what kind of public value the company produced in the previous year. So welcome, Klaus. There are more and more indications, ladies and gentlemen, in Austria and abroad that freedom of the press is under threat. In the United States, this threat comes from the highest office, with President Trump deriding the established media for distributing what he calls fake news. But this discrediting the media has now also found its way into Europe. It is particularly often used by right-wing parties. In Hungary, And in Poland, for example, the public broadcasting companies were stripped of any objectivity, and only functionaries who conformed to the government position were installed. In Austria, the vice chancellor and leader of the Freedom Party earlier this year posted a picture on Facebook of one of ORF's most respected anchormen and plastered the word "distributor of lies" over it. He later apologized. And just yesterday, an email by the Austrian Interior Ministry surfaced that suggested that police should reward or punish those media which are respective, supportive, or critical about police actions. This is, of course, totally undemocratic, unacceptable, and violates all norms of how press freedom is defined. And then there is the constant verbal assault against the public broadcaster ORF, most often by the right-wing Freedom Party, including one to strip it of its public funding through license fees. So to put all this into perspective, I will now turn to my former colleague and friend Klaus Unterberger from Austrian ORF, and I will ask him how much does that still apply, what I had just talked about. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the kind invitation. I'm certainly not going into Austrian politics at this time. You may judge yourself. Maybe it's also a little bit time to focus on, let's say a little bit of hope after we heard all these challenges that are obvious threat for European democracy. But I think the crucial question that I want to focus on is if public service media can be actually part of the solution and not part of the problem. So therefore, I think there has to be ways out of this crisis of European democracy. And I think we should be interested on, let's say, not just complain about the obvious threat, but also consider what exactly could be helpful in order to protect European democracy and our societies. However, I'm starting with challenges, as everybody else, and as far as I can see, there are two major disruptions concerning and affecting all what has been previously said. First of all, it's obviously the digital disruption that has led to a shift of global economy and also how we perceive the world. I don't have to go into details here, but we know the fact that just the 5 big players on the internet in the United States are 11, 12 times bigger than all existing public service media companies altogether. We know about the 360 million users of Facebook. We know about the 81% of those who use the internet, who use YouTube. We know about the 90% of Google has in the search engine market share. So if this is the invisible hand of the market, it is currently suffocating us. So therefore, I think it's time to act up, and I do not agree that we only can complain. First of all, of course, we can regulate. Seen as a citizen, because as much as we did deregulation in the last 20 years. In the last 20 years, we followed the paradigm to protect the market from regulation quite successfully and for good reasons in order to create business opportunities and to fight bureaucracy. Maybe time has changed right now and it's different. And it's up to protecting the public space from the negative impact of global economy. So therefore, I think there are measurements and regulations in place that could be used. And on the other side, of course, it is possible to support media quality. So therefore, one just has to do that, and I'm giving you some examples how that could be made. But first of all, let me also point out the second major disruption, which is also obvious because we've already been talking about, and this is the fact that politicians and governments are more and more touching the independence of media. And I'm not talking about Latin America, obviously. I'm talking about Europe. And this is a major disruption, as it is endangering the public sphere. Being a journalist by myself, I have to insist that there has to be a Chinese wall between journalism and any kind of external influence. And everybody who is staring down that wall is not just destroying the credibility of public service media, but it is destroying trust in media and therefore endangering democracy. So therefore, I think one has to be very careful about that. The problem, however, is seen as a citizen. You know, I'm listening to national and European politicians, and the challenge is everyone's a good guy. Everybody has his or her confession for defending democracy. So therefore, if European Union media policy does not have opportunities to hold politicians and governments accountable to defend independency of media, I think we are buried with our confessions, and the bad thing is that democracy will lay beside us. So therefore, I think it's time to act as well. So what could be done? I'm going to give you three challenges that could be chances as well, especially for public service media. The first and the most important would be social cohesion. Which is crucial, obviously, because at the moment, what are we seeing in European societies? More and more parts of the population get disconnected from the institution of democracy, representative democracy, losing trust in democracy. They somehow evaporate in filter bubbles or get caught into movements that are triggered from fear and anger. So therefore, social cohesion is crucial. This is exactly the place where public service media comes in, because we do have a vivid contract with society, including diversity, inclusion, culture, and entertainment. And this is not just about confession. The good thing is that public service media can be held accountable. Just one example, what we did recently back home in Austria. We published a tiny little booklet with the number 55. Well, this is not magic number or number magic. This is referring to the 55 cents that license fee payers will give to Austrian Broadcasting Corporation on a daily basis. And what we did is to give the broad audience 55 good reasons why they are paying and what they get in return. And not just telling out confessions, but these are facts and figures related to more and more in-depth information. So therefore, the good thing is that public service media, contrary to commercial companies, can be held accountable and can be controlled. And I think this is crucial and very important. So you have a reliable source of media quality that not just is in confessions, and knowing that many of the commercial media right now is arguing, okay, we are also delivering public value to you, but I just want to point out that what is considered to public value is not a slice of a sausage. If you have one good team player, you're not winning the championship. So therefore, you have to have a specific look who is delivering what. So what I'm saying here, the difference matters. Let me give you a second example, which is investment in media quality, and I'm talking business here. We all know that there is a lot of money in the media industry. It's not just about complaining that the bad Americans are overwhelming us. In Europe as well, we know the 10 largest companies in the commercial sector, they have a plus of 38% since 2012. We know that Global Liberty has had a raise of more than 90% in the last 6 years. And that might be good news for shareholders, but for sure this is not good news, contrary bad news for the public. Because at the same time where this media industry is getting so much money, we are perceiving and experiencing the worst, the most scariest crisis of quality journalism. So therefore, I think we have to learn that ownership is not irrelevant when it comes to media. That we have, as I said before, to protect the public purpose in media, and maybe also to change another mindset or paradigm we always are referring to support public service media, like as if it would be a heavy burden, and those poor politicians always want to bring up some money to give it to us. I think that's not appropriate. I think it is about investment in media quality. This is what it is. And as we are talking, in the same way as we are talking about growth or decline in economic terms, I think we have to speak about growth and decline in democratic awareness. So therefore, I'd like you to consider to speak about investment in media quality, which seems to me quite relevant. Do I have just a minute more, or am I at the end? A minute more, then I may refer to the last challenge that might be also a scenario of change and chances, and that is obviously the digital disruption. And this is not just about the shift and then disruption in economy, but also in perception, in the question how we perceive the world. Just think about the beginning of the internet, what we did expect from swarm intelligence. That would be the ultimate diversity, the ultimate freedom of speech. And at the end, what we see is that the swarm intelligence of the internet is multiplying also false news, fake news, and there are troll factories out there delivering false and fake news and even affecting elections. So therefore, it's about relevance. It's about to be connected with the broad audiences. And I'm pointing that out because many out there are referring to public service media in the way that they are saying, okay, well, we're gonna focus exclusively on information because this is crucial. But all the rest, let's say the entertainment, would be up to the commercial market. And I think this is not the way to go because it's absolutely not taking in mind how politically important the value of the entertainment is, also in terms of reaching the audiences. So therefore, if we reduce public service media to, let's say, the core of information, then we would definitely lose relevance in terms of democratic value. So therefore, I think this is the time to also add some good news for you, because public service media has already found a way to go on in the future, which is called, public open space, which would be a vision for public service media to develop in the future as a digital platform that would open up with cooperations with institutions, with universities, with museums, with civil society. And I think that would be a perspective to go. Public service media in the future of the digital age is meant to give social media back its true meaning. And I think this is a vision that would be part of the solution, and that would be enough reason to invest in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Klaus. I will now turn to Monika Garbaciauskaite-Budriene. I'll try it another time. And I wonder what Klaus just said, coming from a very small European country, turning now to an even smaller European country. Does that, what Klaus explained to us, also apply by and large to Lithuania?
I think yes, and I think that we are facing just the same challenges as anyone else and any PSM anywhere, because now we have a global world, and the same challenges more or less apply to everyone. And I really admire Mr. Attenberg's speech because he gave a very clear ideas and points on how we should move on and what are the core challenges. So my presentation will be a little bit more probably dull and specific. I'm going to speak about the challenges that concrete Lithuanian PSM is facing recently and will be facing in the next year, I think. So first of all, I would like to point out that I'm a rather new Director General. I came here just half of a year ago, beating another 11 competitors in the competition, in a fair competition. And now I inherited a certain situation as well as political situation, which I'm going you to tell about. Actually, at the beginning of this year, this year in January, Lithuanian Parliament decided to set up an ad hoc investigative commission to investigate the operations of Lithuanian national broadcaster. And so they were investigating, and they are about to come with proposals and conclusions at about, they promised it at 8th of October. And, but there are already some drafts circulating around, some draft of conclusions, and some were already presented to the management of National Broadcaster and the Council of Management of National Broadcaster. And what worries us that, among other things, we expect an official call to changes of LRT's management structure. So there are several changes, and among these there are probably 3 major proposals that I'm going to tell about. So current situation and setup of our management is this way, that we are managed by the council, composed of 12 members, director general and administration, and there is an administrative commission which is supposed to help on financial and administrative issues more on a recommendation basis. So what are the proposals to come up from politicians? They want to close the administrative commission and replace it by the board. And the idea of management board is probably not wrong itself, but the problem is that now at the moment there is a lack of clarity of how it would be composed and what exact will be its functions. And we also see some threat of more political representatives in this board and the way it will be composed. The number of the members of the board, they say, should be about from 5 to 7, and it should be composed of administration representatives and also independent board members. How this board will be formed is not clear at this moment, and they propose several ways, alternative ways. The list of candidates could be selected by the way of public tender, as in the case of state-owned enterprises, and submitted to the council by the Governmental Selection Commission. Another alternative is that the list of candidates is drafted by the selection committee functioning under the council, and another alternative is that executive members are selected and appointed by the council, while independent candidates are selected by Lithuanian Republic Government Commission and appointed by the council. So we see here the threat of larger political involvement in forming this body. Another change that is being proposed in the drafts is that Parliament also wants to change the procedure of the appointment of members of LRT Council, the highest body. This could lead to a system where politicians in power will be able to appoint their members. Currently, there are 12 members of the council, and they are appointed 4 at one time, 4 president office, 4 parliament, and 4 various organizations. And now the issue is, the main thing is that now the terms of politicians and the terms of the members of a council that they appoint do not overlap. Unless this is the second term of the president or the party in the parliament. For example, now the president in May just appointed 4 new members,
of the Council, but her term is ending in May 2019, and the next president actually will not have a chance to appoint any of his members directly. Commission wants to change that, and LRT believes that proposals are worrying because we are moving away from good practice of depolitization and of the governance of PSM. Commission wants to amend the procedure for the appointment of members of the Council, providing that the President shall appoint 4 Council members, 1 at a time, on an annual basis. Also, to amend the procedure for appointment of members of the Council, providing that the Parliament appoints 4 members of the Council, 2 at a time, in accordance with the principle that appointments shall take place during each term of the Parliament. And the term of the Council members could be reduced from 6 to 5 years. The next worrying thing is that according to the drafts of proposals, another governing body, outside governing body, Lithuanian Radio and Television Commission, shall have the right, if necessary, to apply the sanctions provided for in the legislation in relation to LRT and LRT executives. At the moment, Lithuanian Radio and Television Commission has no such exclusive duties towards LRT. It treats LRT just as any other broadcaster. So we are now waiting eagerly for the final and official proposals of Lithuanian Parliament Commission, and we hope that our politicians will realize that PSM is the main guarantee of our young democracy. And also I would like to thank EBU representatives that who always helped us to fight for free media in Lithuania. And so this is it. This is about it, about this technical details, which are important. And another thing, what we find probably difficult is to communicate these technical details to broad public. For example, the composition of the management board is such, like, it seems like a dull topic, but it is, the evil is in the details. So yeah, we will try to do that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. As a matter of fact, this sounds very familiar to me as an Austrian, but I don't want to go into the detail right now. I would rather turn to Krzysztof Luft now, who probably, if I see the Polish media landscape correctly, has everything that has been discussed now, or everything that will be discussed or is in discussion in Lithuania has already happened in your country. The takeover of the government, the takeover by the government of Polish public television has already happened, didn't it?
No, obawiam się, że w znacznie
I'm afraid so. I'm afraid so. So in a minute I'm going to tell you more about it. But every time we discuss public media, we should simply know why the media were invented in the first place. Well, just to help people understand the world, so that people can find themselves in the world. Then there was this propaganda function and commercial function, which is actually a domineering one. So let me start again. English is available on Channel 2. Ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you, let's start with this recollection of why the media were invented in the first place. Well, to explain the world, to understand the world, so that people can find themselves in the world better. And then we had this propaganda function and commercial function, which is definitely domineering in the world we know. And actually, in democracy, this explanation of the world is of key importance because people constantly make selections, choices. It's not about the ballot box, but also the daily lives. And I think European democracies, respond to this need by public media. They should be well-financed and, of course, independent, as we've already discussed. Unfortunately, regrettably, I'm speaking here before you from the perspective of a citizen of a country where the former, so the financing, has been only partly successful, and the latter, so independence, has been totally unsuccessful. Well, the public radio is financed modestly, but still 80% of the income is from the license fee. But Polish television, public television, gets only between 15 and 25% from license fee in its yearly budget. And of course, this is to the detriment of the mission, and there is more commercialization. However, this issue of commercialization over recent years, especially 3 years, has been marginalized by the propaganda function. So let me explain. Just after the election in 2015, the new government introduced as one of the first decisions, so this was a statutory solution, it subjugated the public radio and television to its policy. In this way, it got rid of all the existing barriers, legal barriers between the public media and the world of politics. Well, let me add that for 6 years, I was member of the constitutional body responsible for electronic media. This was between 2010 and 2016. And as a member of this body, I participated in a very dramatic sitting of the Polish Senate in the evening of the last day of 2015, so 31st of December. And I was really trying to explain to the senators that this subjugation of the public media was actually taking away the very raison d'etre of the functioning of the media. Well, they said, and it was quite surprising to me and saddening, this was for the first time, and this was repeated later on, that this was the way to be. The public media, they said, were there to support those in power, support the government, because the government has been given power to rule. And indeed, on the basis of this amendment of this Media Act, all the authorities of all the public media companies were removed, and then in a very arbitrary way, without no procedure, without no justification, new people were appointed by the Minister of the Treasury, of course a member of the ruling party. For example, the president of the Polish television, public television, is still and was appointed back then a politician of the ruling party of many years. He was also a member of the European Parliament, and he co-authored on several occasions the electoral propaganda of the ruling party. And of course, we have no balance between the airtime devoted to those in power and the opposition. For example, in May 2018, we had 64 hours of presence of people from the ruling party, and the opposition for 10 hours. This was May 2018. Then in June, more than 10 times in terms of time, airtime, more than 10 times this was more for the politicians from the ruling party than those from the opposition. So, well, this is serious, but statistical data are not that important. I think no pluralism, no impartiality is terrible. And of course, there is very imbalanced selection of information. There is commentary from journalists, and there is blatant lying about reality. So basically, the key public media in Poland have been turned into crude propaganda mouthpiece. And well, I'm not that young, but I think older people remember very well as well communist times, and this really resembles all that. For example, a viewer can draw the conclusion that before the Law and Justice win in 2015 had been a country in ruin, in chaos, exploited by foreign powers and traitors and thieves. So there are various broadcasts with personal smears on those that are active in the opposition, NGOs, judges, young doctors that wanted some more money, and also people with disabilities who also protested in the Polish parliament. It is also quite shameful that when this amendment was made to this medialized act, the Holocaust, and this was about complicity of Poles suggested, and that could simply carry a penalty. So the comment from the Polish public television was very crude jokes and anti-Semitic comments. And also as regards Poland's most recent history, the heroes of our freedom, the legendary leader of Solidarity, Lech Wałęsa, they are portrayed as thieves and traitors. Quite recently, we had another anniversary of this Accords of Gdańsk from 1918, and they were signed by Wałęsa, but his name was never mentioned. So these are lies about reality, and we also have such primitive tricks as simply playing with the TV image. You wouldn't imagine, but once in the main news bulletin, they erased, digitally erased a heart, which was a sticker on someone's jacket. This was the jacket of an opposition politician, and this was simply to show the support to the largest charity action, which is called the Great Orchestra of Christmas Assistance or Help, or charity, and this was simply, this is massively popular, but shouldn't be supported by opposition parties. So this is really a dark joke. This is a theater of the absurd, I would say, of propaganda, and it really stands to reason. And of course, this falsifies reality. At the same time, luckily, the public media are losing viewership. Finally, let me mention a great challenge faced by public media also in Europe, because it's not only in Poland that the EU is presented as something external, a threat. Well, Poland has enjoyed great civilizational success. It has developed also thanks to EU membership, and this seems absurd, but we know that there is dejection, there is discouragement, there is fatigue. So nationalism, xenophobia, various particular interests that are a threat to the cohesion of our community. Well, they appear everywhere, and I think that political leaders should do something about it. They should alleviate those fears. But I think it's also a duty of the media, in particular the public media, because people are afraid of things they don't know, they don't understand. And I think that it's the media that should, or is well placed, best placed, to explain to them, help them understand these complexities of today's reality. So we have various challenges. Fake news, for example, it's a secret weapon of various groups of interests. What we need is a responsible stance presenting in the face of all this solid knowledge. I know it's banal, it may be a bit naive, but I think this is the way we should explain the world to the people today, here and now, and they need it. After all, security, a sense of safety and stable development are not givens. They are not given both for Poland and across Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. If there is such a thing as a central theme in what we have heard from the three panelists, in my opinion, it is that there are always inside forces, and I mean inside, then I talk about the country and the politics of the country, inside forces that nibble at the independence of the public broadcaster. And then there are the outside forces that were discussed before, Google, Facebook, and so on. But I wonder, and perhaps you can tell me briefly, because we're also running over time now, you can tell me briefly, how is the most important common good of public television, how is that in the respective countries, and that is credibility? How much trust does the audience still have in public television, particularly, of course, in the news reporting? Very briefly, perhaps Klaus, you can start, and then Monica.
Well, I think there's the good news. We are far ahead in terms of being the trusted source of information by the public. I think this is the case in Austria as in many countries. We know from scientific research that the democratic value of news is quite considerably higher from public service media segment than from the commercial sector. However, I think quality will exist in the eye of the viewer. Yeah? So therefore we cannot confess that we are the trusted one. We have to do something about it. So therefore I think what we actually can do is to prove credibility. What we did back home is to establish, let's say, a code of conduct. Yeah? Where you can actually be held accountable in terms of independency, what you're referring to, meaning inner voices, so to say. Yeah, I think this is absolutely crucial that we are checking, that we have, that we would check balances, that we would prove credibility in many ways. I think very important is, and I would recommend it to all EBU members in specific countries, that journalists have to have rights. It's not just about diplomacy and confessions. In the forefront of journalism, in real reality, it all depends if the journalist who is at the news desk has the self-esteem and the right to protect its independency or not. So therefore, it's absolutely crucial that we always refer to the reality of media. This is not just media policy made here in Brussels, but the real reality of independency, of the freedom of media is made out there. So we have to, let's say, focus on the value of the journalist, him or herself. I think this is very crucial. And the last thing I'd like to add is that we cannot take anything for granted anymore. I think we've been used that people would automatically appreciate what we are doing. So that's no longer the case. So therefore we have to invest to speak about ourselves, not praising ourselves, but giving the audience, giving the public an awareness and some appropriate information what the meaning of public service is. We are confronted with a young generation. They don't even know what public service media means because they're on Google, they're on Facebook. They are not confronted with that. So therefore, I think we need a platform, a reference point that would again show what media for the common good would mean. And this is more than just public service media. We've got community media out there. We've got many quality media that would be also partner of traditional public service media. So therefore, I think this is also a wake-up call for public service media to go into plenty of cooperations.
Thank you, Klaus. What I'm missing when I hear the numbers, and Klaus didn't give us the numbers, but obviously there is a high correlation. What I'm missing is sort of the public outcry if public television is being attacked from the government or from politics. How does it look in Lithuania?
I think that the educated people and elites understand, and at least on Facebook you can really observe outcry, and there was a real scandal when this Ad Hoc Investigation Commission was established. Also, what I would like to add is that this investigation commission damaged the trust of the numbers of people that trust, diminished these numbers, and the latest survey showed that it went down after they started to investigate. But also what I would like to add is that it is very important, as was mentioned before, to invest into good journalism, and that is what our new administration and LRT does. We established the Department of Investigative Journalism and are publishing investigations every week. And just today, one of them went out. And what I always tell to the journalists, and I used to tell when I work in a commercial media and in a news website, was that you have to be professional and do your job to the end, and then nobody, none of our politics can actually say anything to you. You can always be right then. Just do your job, be professional. And now when then we have this problem of fake news and other dangerous things, so the journalists should come back to the roots and fact check and just do what they have to do. So investments into journalism is very important, and of course PSMs overall have to communicate all the good things that they do for the society and do it better. I agree as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Monica. I want to ask Krzysztof, in Poland, have the people been already so intimidated or even manipulated that they do not recognize anymore that television is not giving them objective news, but only the mouthpiece of the government?
Well, some do recognize that, some don't. One could really say that there is a drastic drop in the audiences and in trust in the recent years. Well, I don't have the data, but it's about 20% loss of audiences of the National Polish Radio, which had in the past been credible. Radio, as opposed to TV, was trusted. I must say, it's not only the matter of law. We've had quite a good legislation, media legislation, created in 92, 93, based mainly on the French statutes and law. But it's not only the matter of legislation, law, it's the matter of certain behavior. We could say that these laws, these rules have been broken every now and then. It happens everywhere. It happened everywhere, but we were moving forward so that the world of the media and the world of politics were separated. And what happened recently, it's not that the rules had been broken, but they have been annihilated, dismantled. They're no longer there. When I say that public media are there to support the government, which was elected by the electorate, this is something quite illogical now. We can't say that certain rules have been broken and certain haven't. No, it's not the case. The rules were dismantled, erased. And this has consequences for the trust and credibility. The audiences are those who support the government, and they're quite numerous. And what happens in the editorial programs and in other production is terrible, really. I only hope that this madness will end at some stage and the Polish media will have to be rebuilt from scratch and new institutions created.
Thank you very much. Unless there is an urgent question, yes, there is one here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say something to Monica from Lithuania. We have the same, we are ERT and we are LRT. Look, what you said about the modification of the governance from administrative council to board, to executive board, I suppose. I have to tell you something that maybe is useful for you, that these things are happen to other families as well. And I'm sure you don't know that this happened to EBU in 2007. The many years standing administrative council, which was composed only by members of EBU, according to the law, has been modified, and instead of that administrative council, since 2007, we have executive board. I must tell you also that the day after tomorrow, in Capri, Italy, there is a meeting of the Mediterranean group, the members of EBU, which belongs to the Mediterranean groups, and ERT, it is for the second time. The first we were not lucky because we had shut down in the 2013, but now we come again, and we have paused, and there is in the agenda, the modification of the EBU statutes, and instead of the executive board, we will have again an administrative council. I think this must be of some importance for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we take this as an information. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I will now ask Cecilia Wikström to host the next panel here, and I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a good afternoon.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Most welcome to the third panel this afternoon. To tell you the truth, you all look quite exhausted. Why don't you just take a deep breath and smile at your neighbor? Look, already much more energy in the room. Already, good. So here we go. Here we go. I'm happy to introduce to you the panelists in the third panel, where we are going to discuss the European mechanism for protecting freedom of expression and independence of public service media. Very, very topic subject today. And I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Vasilis Kostopoulos, who is the Managing Director of the Greek Public Service Broadcaster, ERT. Mr. Kostopoulos is a veteran attorney at law and acted as director of the legal department at ERT from 1988 until, believe it or not, 2013. That's a very long time. Over and through his career, Mr. Kostopoulos has closely monitored electronic media, related issues at a national as well as international level, with a focus on those relating to community, telecommunication, and information technology. To my left, I have Silla Bänkö, who is a pillar for public service and media pluralism in Sweden. I recall the days when I was a member of the National Parliament, where she used to be the beacon, the star upon which we all looked. She's been working for the Swedish radio for almost 30 years in various different positions. And currently, finally, let's say, you're serving as the Director General and CEO of the Swedish radio. Since 2010, Silla Bänkö is one of 11 members of the EBU Executive Board and currently holding the post as chair of the EBU Personnel Committee. So, here we are, and we are very eager to listen to you, but let me just highlight what I brought with me from the previous two panels. Bottom line is that knowledge is power. If people are well informed, populism and alternative facts, let's put it that way, that's more positive than to say fake news, alternative facts, have no chance. Knowledge is power, and on that, public service is crucial to any society. Now, after having listened to what's happening, if we take our more member states, what's happening in Hungary, in Poland, most recently in Denmark. As we are speaking this moment, I am receiving emails of great citizens of Ukraine being extremely concerned on what's going on there. But we can just look at the European Union, our European member states, the complete crackdown on independence. And it's sad to see. If somebody would have told us this some 10 years, 15 years ago, we would have laughed out loud and said, no way, it's not going to happen. And here we are. So it's a critical moment, just to mention what's happening in Denmark, where hundreds of persons have lost or will lose their jobs just in days to come, weeks to come. 3 TV channels, 3 radio stations are closing down, most probably. This is Denmark. Who's next? Now, I really would like to give the floor right away to both of you, and I think we'd start with you, Silla.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you all for arranging this public hearing and for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about a subject that matters more today, I would say, than ever before. The role of independent media, and especially independent public service media in democracies across Europe. And my view, of course, is clear. The role can hardly be exaggerated. Impartial news and information that everyone can trust, a content that reaches all audiences and that reflects all views, that brings communities together. Never has it been more important. I do not say this actually only as a head of a large media company. I say this also as a citizen. And I'm concerned about the advance of authoritarian politics. I've been working, as Cecilia said, as a journalist for 30 years, a little bit more actually. It all started for me with studies in economics, but my interest in society and in democracy took me down a different path. It took me towards journalism, and I have never, ever regretted that decision. Nor have I ever been more convinced, actually, than I am today, that our countries and our democracies need journalism, needs media freedom, and needs public service media at its very, very best. In my home country, Sweden, but also in the rest of Europe. In my role as the Director General of Swedish Radio, and as Cecilia also said, as a member of the EBU Executive Board, I often take an active role, actually, in discussions of freedom of the press, public service, and the wider media role in a democracy, both in Sweden and throughout Europe. Sometimes, I must admit, it feels like pushing in an open door. When it comes to media freedom, everyone seems to agree. Very few politicians openly say they want to start chopping away on media freedom. So, nevertheless, exactly that is just going on right now in country after country in Europe. Reporters Without Borders' annual Press Freedom Index shows a worrying trend. Several European member states have plummeted down the list, an undeniable consequence of sweeping restrictions to media freedom, if you ask me. These countries, of course, often dismiss the contamination. The outside world is biased, they say, and independent voices of criticism are tools manipulated by others for political gain, they also say. None of that is true, of course. But the narrative is an effective way of silencing the critics and avoiding necessary reforms to strengthen rather than to restrict the freedom of the press. It is easy to understand why, actually, increasingly authoritarian regimes want a public service that is more loyal to the power. It is a way of controlling the flow of news, and avoiding criticism. It is a way of avoiding being exposed to critical views. That's why they are doing this. In the populist narrative that has become more and more common recently, journalism has become to play an increasing role. Free independent media are pointed out as part of the elite, are pointed out as part of a liberal establishment, in opposition, they say, to the rest of the society, and which continuously serves its own interests. And independent media are referred to as tools for malicious people who want to harm their own nation. By repeating these messages, both in Europe and across the Atlantic, as we heard before, populists look to devaluate journalism and devaluate its opportunities to be an independent force that contributes to democratic life. And there are so many ways to control the media. One is to pass draconian media laws that, in combination with media authorities with far-reaching powers, are able to impose high fines. This is going on. Another one is to sack hundreds or thousands of journalists from public service companies, replacing senior executives with government-loyal employees and manipulating those who are afraid of losing their jobs. A third way is making it difficult, actually, for independent commercial media to survive by reducing their opportunities to earn money. This is also going on right now. A fourth way is oligarchs loyal to those in power who buy up independent media and change their focus and change their mission. A fifth way is that time after time dismiss independent journalists as tools for foreign interests, calling them traitors, and creating a climate that leads to hate, that leads to trolling, and leads to threat. This is also going on in Sweden. And the sixth way is to transform independent public service corporations into only cultural institutions. All these 6 things are going on around you right now in Europe. And all this might sound extremely far-fetched to you, but we now see how liberal democracy is challenged in a way that was hardly possible just a few years ago. The attacks on free and independent media can only be seen as part of this. Attacks on media institutions can only be seen as part of the devaluation of the checks and balances we usually associate with liberal democracies. And I note these elements across Europe with the deepest concern, I have to admit. And I also, shamefully, note that so far it has not been done very much at the European level to try to stop the attacks on media in general and on public service in particular. And I must say, the risk is that we wait too long, that we sleepwalk through a gradual erosion to media freedom, that we miss the slow and carefully dismantling of a set of democratic ideals that matter greatly to all of us. The devil always lies in the details. Don't forget that. And that's why I want today to make a clear call for action. We have to act. The defense of Europe's public service media and the independence of the wider media should be made a high priority within the European Union. This is an urgent project, it can't wait, and that's why this hearing actually is very, very welcomed. As you all know, public service represents a set of essential democratic ideals. For instance, giving a voice to the voiceless, pursuing the truth without fear or without favor, but also ensuring that the joys of culture and learning are available to everybody, and that is irrespective of income or of background. And research clearly states that people living in countries with a strong public service have greater knowledge about the political system and the society than people living in countries with a more commercialized media system. That's a fact. But for public service to be able to be at its very, very best, a number of things are actually required. So let's look at them. The first one is true independence. That must be guaranteed. Declarations of the importance of free journalism are, of course, very important, but they are not enough. There must be a legal structure that seriously guarantee the editorial integrity and independence of Europe's public service companies. The second thing that is required is long-term funding, and that must also be secured. Subjecting public service to constant cuts, which is going on around Europe, risks undermining its journalism and its ability to hold power to account. And the third is that we need a broad remit, and that also has to be safeguarded, because narrowing the focus of public service risks diminishing its relevance and undermining its universality. An effective way to reduce the importance of public service providers is to shrink their mission. So, after listening to this, can there be any doubt, given these developments, that we need more than ever to stand up for media freedom and democratic ideals? No, not if you ask me. That's why I'm actually struck by the lack of a stronger voice within the European Union that not only monitors this area, but can make itself heard and very visible, both when it comes to media freedom and in particular to public service and to democracy. The lifeblood of a healthy democracy is the existence of a free and independent media, and public service journalists pursuing the truth without fear or without favor. So more than ever before, I would say, we need now to make sure that there is a voice that can stand up for them. So my conclusion, very shortly, is politicians, like you guys here, must protect journalism and do everything that you can possibly do so that journalists can do their job without being threatened or being harassed in their home countries. And this involves reviewing legislation. It also involves requiring the police to take threats to media companies seriously, and it involves doing their utmost to ensure that you have effective public service broadcasting and that it's not undermined. Thank you very much.
And I thank you very much and pass immediately over the floor to Mr. Kostopoulos. It's red and it's on.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. You know that the leading idea is that, the leading, I underline, idea is that the main and most effective mechanism for the protection of the freedom of expression is establishing the European Convention for Human Rights in Rome, signed in Rome in the year 1952. According to the Article 10 of the above convention, everyone has the right to freedom of expression. Full stop. This right includes freedom to hold opinions and to receive and import information and ideas without interference by public authority and regardless of frontiers. However, the exercise of these freedoms, since it comes with its duties and responsibilities, may be subject to formalities, conditions, and restrictions which are prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society. In order to illustrate the effectiveness of the above European mechanism for the protection of the freedom of expression of the public service media, I would like to refer to a relatively recent case still pending before the European Court of Human Rights. Only to remind you that this case was introduced in the court in November 2014, and now we have 2018. And we don't know yet the fixation of the hearings. This is a case against the Greek government for the violation of the Article 10 of the European Convention resulting from the closure of ERT, the Greek Public Service Broadcasting Organization, the Hellenic Broadcasting Corporation, in June 2013. As is well known, a joint decision of the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Press, published in the Government Gazette on 11 June 2013, closed down ERT SA, which is a public enterprise owned by the Greek public, controlled and supervised by the state. Shortly after the publication of the aforementioned joint ministerial decision, the announced closure of ERT began to spread as breaking news in Greece and abroad. The black ERT screens shocked Greek citizens in Greece and around the world, causing strong reactions. In a letter to the Greek Prime Minister, the President of the European Parliament at that time, Martin Schulz, noted, "With surprise and sorrow, the European Parliament has been informed of the Greek government's decision to shut down the public broadcaster ERT without warning and without a prior democratic dialogue with the government, the Greek Parliament, and the institution." EBU, the European Broadcasting Union, stressed that the decision of the Greek government is not only undemocratic, it is totally unprofessional, since ERT has signed agreements and contracts and that cannot be ignored. On the very next day, after ERT's closure, POSPERT, the Pan-Hellenic Federation of Workers in Broadcasting and Television Enterprises, and its president, Mr. Kalfagiannis, filed a petition for annulment on the 12th June 2013 of the joint ministerial decision that abolished ERT before the Greek Council of State. The above petition for annulment of the applicants was discussed before the plenary of the Council of State on the 27th of September 2013, and the court issued its judgment number 1901 on the 23 May 2014. This decision dismissed in majority the aforementioned petition for annulment of the applicants. 10 judges, in total of 25, disagreed on the ground that the contested joint ministerial decision that abolished ERT and interrupted the provisions of public service broadcasting runs counter to Article 15 of the Greek Constitution, which established the operation of a fundamental to the democracy public service, the public service broadcasting, whether independent or parallel to the existence of private broadcasters, and therefore must be annulled. Among the several grounds of the applicant's petition for the annulment, a plea concerning the nullity of the contested ministerial decision for the abolition of ERT was argued as a breach of the European Convention on Human Rights in the Article 10. On this issue, the decision of the Council of State stated that, quote, "It does not appear that a public broadcaster is required to function," unquote. This is because, as the court has held, the provision of Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, quote, "do not result that the state parties an obligation to establish a public service broadcaster if there are other means to ensure the quality and balance of the programs through the operation of a large number of private broadcasters." Given that all member states of the European Union and most European states have already adopted the dual broadcasting system, the main feature of which is the coexistence of public service and private sector commercial broadcasting, the question is whether this system may constitute an acquis communautaire, which in turn may contribute to the interpretation of Article 10 of the European Convention, as this was avoided by the ruling of the plenary session of the Council of State. I must also finish, because the chairman now insists, that the European Broadcasting Union has deposited last April a third-party intervention intervening in the ERT case. As you know, EBU is a professional association of national radio and television broadcasters and the world's leading alliance of public service media with 73 members in 56 countries in Europe, Consequently, an existing public service broadcaster benefits from the protection of ERT of Article 10 of the European Convention, which also includes freedom of media. The guarantee of a dual media system, therefore, corresponds to a European standard which needs to be taken into account when interpreting media freedom as set out in Article 10 of the Convention. The EBU believes that this case, the ERT case before the European Court of Human Rights, is of a great significance, not only for Greece and the ex-ERT employers, but for Europe as a whole, as it puts the spotlight on media freedom and pluralism, and more generally on the democratic values enshrined in the Convention. The EBU sees the case as an opportunity for the Court to clarify the positive obligation of states under the Convention to ensure media freedom and pluralism. Thank you very much.
And we thank you very much, Mr. Kostopoulos. Very interesting indeed to hear about the history on what happened when the screens went black in Greece. Now we need to look forward to the future also on the current situation and where to go. We know that being a journalist today is more dangerous than in a very, very long time. I just need to recall the tragic murder of a lady journalist in Malta, a male journalist in Slovakia last year. I can also refresh your memory and tell you about David Isak, a Swedish journalist who is still in prison since 2001 in Eritrea. Nobody knows if he's alive or if he's dead. It's a very difficult situation to be a journalist in Europe today. So my question to both of you actually is, what measures, you have pointed out what we need to do, but what measures could we in the European Parliament and the European institutions do today in order to highlight this situation even better? I mean, most of what we are talking about actually falls under the scope of subsidiarity and national legislation. But what are your wishes? What would your advices be for us in this House and in the other European institutions? Would you, Mr. Kostopoulos, like to say something on that? On ways ahead?
Look, I just heard from my friend, the Swedish representative, that it's a time to pass from the big words to action. And really, I'm very happy to hear this in this room, because really these rooms are rooms for discussions only. And just I'm worrying how now we can pass to the action. I see two levels. One is the level of the European Broadcasting Union, and the other is the level of the European Parliament. I believe that this action has to be taken into very great consideration. These two entities must study the efficiency of a proposed joint action, because I'm very afraid that this case will not have the happiest end. Just to give you an idea from Greece. You know, we are in the middle of maybe in the last year before the elections, and the things are very, very tough. We hear, for instance, the leader of the opposition saying that if I win the elections, I will cut the half of the ERT budget. Then there is another guy from the same party who spoke last week to a private channel, and she declared that ERT cannot have information programs, only entertainment. I must recall you that this gentleman was president of NERIT. You would ask me what was NERIT. NERIT was an organization, a TV and radio organization, which functioned during the 2 years of the black, 2013 until 2015. He's a professor of the university, and he was the president of this organization. And this organization, now, this president now, asks last week that ERT now must stop producing information program. And of course, I must not hide from you, because the president of EBU has underlined some event happened in Sky. Sky is a private channel with this guy that has been murdered, etc. Didn't say that the same leader of the opposition.
Yes, we are going into detail here now. We are going into detail on Greece now. In principle, I asked you about your advice.
Ask his deputies to abstain for ERT information programs. He put an embargo in the public service broadcasting organization. And in some months, we will have elections.
It's a critical situation. Sila, what would your advice be to me and my colleagues in this House, and also the other European institutions, to protect and prevail?
Well, if we look forward, I mean, basically, I would give you 3 thoughts. One is that there are so many rules and very clear-cut rules on when you allow a country into the European Union. It's not so easy once they're in the Union to take action if they don't live up to the same standards while they're in the club. So maybe that is something that needs to be changed, so that you live up to the standards also when you are in the club and not only when you want to be in the club. The other thing that I'm constantly saying to the Swedish politicians, and I think, frankly, that they think maybe I'm a pain in the ass sometimes, but I'm trying to tell them that they have a personal responsibility. If you truly think this is important, then you have to act, which means that, I mean, there are interaction with all these countries on different levels. And as a politician, you go to all these countries. And I think there are basically 2 questions you need to bring with you and you need to ask all the time. The first one is there a legislation in place for free and independent media? If it isn't, you have to ask why, and you have to demand that changes should be made. And the other question you should obviously ask is, do you have any journalists in your prison? And if they do, you should, of course, act and immediately ask them to release them. I mean, this is a personal responsibility any European politician can take when they go and visit the country wherever they want to go. And the third one is actually, and I'm quoting now, I think, Klaus Unterberger here, why is there always a discussion about public service media and less money? Who will be the first one who stands up there and say, well, public service media is more needed than ever. Let's give them some more money. I haven't heard any politician saying that, but if you truly think this is extremely important, then maybe this is the narrative that should be spoken out in the future.
Thank you very much. So, the Copenhagen criteria, there should be a mechanism monitoring that. Secondly, take action. Follow up in each country. Are there anyone in prison here that is a journalist by profession? Yes or no? And is there legislation in place? Very good pieces of advice. Thank you very much. We have also questions from the audience. Tadeusz, do you stay? I think we can stay 5 minutes more since we actually started later. Mr. Marias, be very brief if you can.
How brief is brief? Well, first of all, I would like to say that I was the last politician to speak when the transmission of the public broadcasting in Athens was stopped some years ago. But also, when there was a transmission live, you know, Mr. Chairman, of the debate we had with Mr. Tsipras. It was live on the Greek television. Tsipras discussed, and then the commissioner, and then EPP and S&D. And when I took the floor on behalf of the ECR, the transmission was cut. That's an indication of how the public television works. And what I have to raise, I will raise this today, as I have said 5 times in the plenary, and also in a special discussion we had in the Petty Committee with Mr. Timmermans. Mr. Kostopoulos, as you see here, there are no national political parties. National political parties participate in political groups. And all the discussion in the European Parliament takes place on behalf of European political groups. So when you have special transmissions, special events on the Greek television regarding the European Parliament, you have to take into account the strength of the political groups and not the strength of the national political parties. This means that you have to treat ECR on a 10% basis and not just vanish us. Because I have made a calculation which is very clear, and I stop. We are here in the European Parliament of at least 1,700 days as MEPs right now. And you had 2 or 3 at least transmissions of political issues on your television, which means more than 5,000 events. I have appeared only in 20 events. That is only 0.25%. This is not democracy. And this is the issue that the ECR is going to present to you. We are going to come to Athens to raise these issues. But this issue, I have raised it 4 times in the plenary. Just a second. I have raised...
Actually, we need to finish.
Okay, I finish in 10 seconds.
This is not a general question.
I finish in 10 seconds.
Detailed.
I finish in 10 seconds. So the issue is not only for you, but also for all the others to understand that here we have political parties. Political parties are going to run as with Spitzenkandidat in the Euro elections, so you have to take into account the strength of political groups. And I believe that you now take this message and act accordingly as far as it concerns our group, which is the ECR. And later I can give you all the details. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sure you can sort that out between yourselves afterwards in your own language.
No, no, it's an issue which concerns the European Parliament, because we are going to go to Euro elections, and if we are vanished now, then we have no chance in the elections in 7 months. So it's an issue which concerns the European Parliament, not us.
There is another question from a lady in the audience. Please.
Thank you very much, Radka Bečova from the European Broadcasting Union. I would like first to thank Mr. Austrevicius and the group of MEPs who supported the organization of this event, because it was really a real opportunity to raise the importance of independence of public service media in Europe, especially in the context of the developments in Europe nowadays. Saying how important is the independence of public service media, we all recognized also that the legislative framework is important. However, in many countries in Europe, we see ad hoc decisions for changes of laws without public consultations, without proper discussion with the public service broadcaster. Public service broadcaster is very often just outspoken by the other members, representative of parliament or the government in the working groups working on these changes. So my question is how the European Parliament could really help in demanding from the national parliaments regular assessments about the situation of media freedom and pluralism in the respective countries, and how the European Parliament could maybe ensure kind of a guidelines to politicians that no laws on public service media should be changed without proper assessment, without proper analysis, and without proper public discussions where at least the public service broadcaster has the say, because this is about their institution, and this institution is now 100 years old or more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and that's a very good question. Of course, I can try to answer very briefly, and it is in connection to what I said in reply to Silla Benke. We need to make sure that the Copenhagen criteria prevails also after a member state is a member of the European Union. Now, there is a small basis for that, because there has to be something between doing nothing from the Commission side and Article 7. There has not been much in between until now. Now, only 2 years ago, we have managed to put together a mechanism that will supervise and assess on a yearly basis all the member states and the fundamental rights. I think that's already a very good start. And we will, from that moment, develop it. It was taken in broad majority in Parliament, and the Commission is now working on that. So I think that's a very good tool, and we will further develop that. Now, time is flying when you have interesting moments, and now time has come for me to introduce to you Mr. Tadeusz Szwefka, a colleague from the Legal Affairs Committee. We have been there together for a long time. I also know that you used to be a news anchor back in Poland. I have seen the pictures. The floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Cecilia. I know that we haven't time, and I will very, very briefly. Please take your headphones. I will continue in my mother tongue, Polish. It will be faster and more concrete. Thank you very much. Przede wszystkim chciałem...
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you very kindly, to our panelists who accepted our invitation and arrived here in Brussels to talk about this extremely important matter, the role of public service media in building, in continuing of the building of the democracy within the European Union and also outside of the EU. As you can see yourselves, this is such a broad subject for which 3 hours have passed extremely quickly, and it's not sufficient for us to explore this subject fully, and it would have lasted much longer if the public had been participating in it more. So it probably means that we should, probably with our friends from the EBU, to organize a very similar meeting, similar hearing in the near future. I would like to repeat what has been already said. It's been very interesting, sometimes very detailed, about the solutions that had happened, that had been introduced in member states. Sometimes it was very broad. That should inspire us as politicians. But I'd like to say something about what is the crucial issue. The public media appear in this very complex media world, or should appear, as this place which is guiding, shedding light onto the reality that help us understand what is happening around us, and that help us to make appropriate decisions that will influence our lives and our groups, those small ones and those larger ones. It means that this role is very difficult, especially for the politicians. Why? Because they should set up rules and regulations that would limit their scope in their intervention in the world, in the public world. So they should put a muzzle on themselves, so to speak. So they should minimize their influence on the media world. Of course, when the politicians are in opposition, they talk very loudly about the freedom of speech and the independence of journalists. When they get into power, the situation looks quite differently, sometimes quite the opposite. And that's the negative effect which we should scorn. So from the public media we expect objectiveness, independence, professionalism. These three elements that are absolutely crucial. And I would add responsibility, because responsibility, as I say this, as a previous journalist and someone who understands very well the journalistic world, the responsibility for a word spoken or written is very diluted. Anybody can say whatever they want without any consequences, one could argue. I'm not only talking about the internet media. So the responsibility and the assurance of the reliability of information is something very, very important and what should be a characteristic of the public media. And the role of the Parliament, just 2 sentences. Ladies and gentlemen, we will not be creating a media policy here in the European Parliament, but the Copenhagen criteria, which Cecilia has mentioned earlier and the previous panelists have talked about, saying what are the criteria for the aspiring members of the EU. Of course, it relates to the pluralism and the freedom of the media. And therefore, when we talk about any control on behalf of the European institutions, they should be included in the rule of law principle. And we can say, because we can see it very clearly, this is being the certain success has been achieved. And the last thing that I wanted to mention, we think that only ensuring the high quality journalism standards, this top standard, is required and would be ensured by appropriate financing and will give the public media the position that we aspire to. That should be the fundamental position, the basic position for the public media. We were working in the European Parliament on the copyright law in radio and television, so that anybody who absolutely in a haphazard and quite free and unruly way use the materials, use the content, and are drawing a lot of benefits, so that they should share the profits, and that the quality of the work of the journalist is being risen, so that the quality is maintained. I could continue at length in this vein, but I'd like to thank everybody for taking part in this discussion. All the panelists have mentioned all those subjects and topics, and we should go back to this matter. But we often talk about the media, not only in commissions, but in the plenary session. Thank you very much for all our guests, and we would like to leave you with a souvenir, Belgian chocolates, sometimes to sweeten up this sour taste that we meet in life. Thank you very much indeed.
Very much to all of you for having come to the European Parliament to share this afternoon with us. Remember that knowledge is power. Let's keep people informed. And where public service media is strong and flourishing, democracy is at its best. Have an excellent day and talk to you soon again.